What's going on, hockey fans? Hey, what's going on? It's James from Offside, chilling with my co-host as always, Dylan D. Fournier. What's up, Dylan?
Not much. How about you, James?
Not too much. And you may realize there's someone else in the chat tonight, and it's the one and only Henny Tweets. We all love this man right here. It's Paul Hendrick. Paul, how's it going tonight?
Great, guys. Thank you. And never a dull moment when it comes with the hockey team, with a lot of expectations, and it's going to be a busy time. I've just been watching episodes of Succession, and it seems like this whole MLSC thing is just another episode of Succession. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, at least before July 1st, and especially after.
Yeah, well, there's lots of dominoes to fall. Before we jump into the episode, I want to say we are proudly brought to you by our friends at Boxing Rock Brewing Co. Make sure you check out their Puck Off Lagerdale. If you get out east, it's the big beer for the big show. And yeah, speaking of the big show, I want to ask that question right out the get-go, Paul. Yeah. Everybody seems to think right now that MLSC really has their fingers way too far in on this and maybe has kind of rocked the boat maybe this past year and even beyond that. I'm wondering, what would you think about that? Do you think they have too much of a say or meddle too much and maybe mess this up a little bit?
Well, I don't know. They're the one, yeah, possibly, but they're one of the most successful organizations in sport in the entire planet. I mean, Real Madrid, Manchester United, New York Yankees, but the Maple Leafs are right there, as are the Rangers, as are the Montreal Canadiens in terms of hockey. So the soccer organizations worldwide are bigger just because they are. So I'm not going to criticize their organization. They have an important stake in what's going on. And, this is obvious. There must have been something going on in terms of transgressions, or at least not getting along, whether it be between Brendan and Kyle. Something came of it in that press conference on Monday with Kyle, where I'm sure he was briefed about, their PR staff, when you're going in, let's stick to the bullet points and move on. Obviously he didn't stick to those bullet points. And in fact, Brendan didn't want him going on, I'm sure, before a new deal was in place, but Kyle had his agenda, came out with it. That was a big domino to fall. Down it fell, and Brendan had to respond in kind, as he did later on in the week. But, from a board of directors scenario, they run things. This is their baby. It's a successful baby, at least in terms of business. Not successful in terms of winning a hockey championship just yet. And so we move on. And it's going to be an interesting next 7 to 10 days. I think they've got to get a general manager in place soon. But for a GM, it's a hell of an opportunity. They've got a good hockey club. They just got to get those pieces locked in and continue moving forward toward what might be a Stanley Cup in the next few years.
Speaking of general managers, who would be your top 5 candidates to be the next general manager?
It's a lot of candidates, right? And it's, what, I don't know. Deep down, Mark Hunter is a guy I'm very fond of in terms of what he brings. Is it as a National Hockey League general manager, is in a co-role with somebody else? I could see that. But Armstrong in St. Louis is obviously a key. And there are a bunch of other names, but to give you 5 and to preach equally, I don't know if I could do that.
What about 3?
Narrow it down now. You want them to get even smaller on a list. Okay.
Yeah.
But
if you're in Ottawa or Pittsburgh or some of these places and looking for success, Kyle Dubas might be a good way to go. He's had his hands, our fingers on the pulse for the last 5 years at this level, and he might be a refreshing change. I wish he was still in Toronto. I think it's unfortunate that he's not in Toronto. I don't, unless he really, really wanted out. Why would you have left this job? But he has, and so they move on. But it's a fair question. Who would you like to see? My gut says I'd like to see a Mark Hunter. I just love what he brings in terms of hockey talent. And
I
it
like
might,
his connections to the players as well. Is
yeah.
I think a big role in going forward to July 1st, especially.
Yeah. Now there's more to it than all of that, in terms of
Yeah.
running a franchise. But Kyle was surrounded by a lot of good people too that share in that. Brandon Pridham being one of the key guys in terms of managing the money and how it's going. And who knows, he could end up elsewhere. He could end up staying as well, helping whoever this new person is coming on. And then, of course, that new person has to get to work with a few signings as well before the draft anyway.
You mentioned, Kyle Dubas not sticking to the bullet points and coming out on his own agenda. And I mean, in one sense, good on him, right? I mean, we want more honesty. We want more transparency. We want people to, let it be known their feelings or what's going on, especially when we watched him throughout the playoffs be frustrated, kind of lose his temper a couple of times. Those things, for Kyle Dubas aren't really things that really show for him. And obviously it was a stressful year. But I look at that and I say, okay, he said those things, but those were not things that Brendan Shanahan didn't already know, probably. He said they did discuss it, but when Shanahan had his press conference, he said these were things that kind of turned my tide on moving on from Kyle Dubas. And I'm just wondering, was it more of the fact that he didn't stick to the script and keep those things behind closed doors that maybe pushed that forward where they were like, no, I think we're going to move on? And the nervousness came in, maybe a little bit trepid because, he said he may not want to be here or may not want to continue in that role. All that rolls into Brendan Shanahan and he has to make a decision on the fly.
Well, I guess if you're Brendan, you want to make sure if you're committed to this, you'd better be committed. And yes, there's pressure on family. Kyle is two kids, Kyle's wife and his two kids. That goes with it, but there's going to be pressure every which way. And I think coming back, with the agent's offer, not only, yes, we'd like to come back, but we want to come back with more money than we previously talked about. Maybe that just all didn't go well. And there obviously was a major disconnect, especially when Kyle stepped away from the podium on Monday evening, that Brendan had to give it some thought. And I'm sure the board members wanted to say, well, hey, where are we? I thought we had this going on. That obviously isn't the case right now. And maybe Kyle doesn't want to be here. And if we're going to have a general manager, the commit's got to be totally there. And if there was just a glimmer of doubt on Kyle's part, then maybe they had to think they had to go elsewhere. And I guess it is what it is, gentlemen. Nothing's perfect. And about the stuff, the firing of the water bottle and, the getting into it with the Tampa fans. I mean, Cam Neely's fired a few water bottles. Yeah. This is not a big deal. I mean, Kyle's a passionate guy. I think if every one of us were in a similar spot like that, I could see us all doing that, most notably myself. So I don't look at that. I've seen Kyle blow up as a GM of the Marlies, back in 2016, on the road in the playoffs, just frustrated with how things are going. I still think he's a smart hockey man. He's been in it from the get-go at a very early age. He's a bright guy. And it's... they won the second round. The optics are different. They didn't win it, and was the way they didn't win it which really disappointed all of us. But I thought he did as well as he possibly could have to give the coaching staff an opportunity and the team to work and go deep in the playoffs. There was no guarantee they're going to win a cup, but I think he did the best he could with what was there. That was a pretty good hockey team. They got beat by a better goaltender and a team that's found a role and an edge. Listen, Sam Bennett's not the above all second coming of Jesus Christ. He's having a hell of a role. Matthew Tkachuk is having a hell of a playoff. But let's be honest, these guys at Christmas, I think a lot of us had our doubts that they were even going to make the postseason, much like St. Louis in 2019, where that team came into Toronto and looked like that entire roster was going to be divvied up and partialed off to parts of the National Hockey League. And then, they get on to a hot goaltender and away they go. That's just the way the pendulum swings in sports and has done so with Florida. So, Toronto's not there, but you want to make sure they don't get too far from what they've got, maybe add to what they've got again and give this thing another run next year. But if you start getting rid of a bunch of key players, et cetera, all of a sudden you're back to step one again and nowhere closer than you ever were. And you might be damn close right now. But if you get rid of a few key pieces that you should not have gotten rid of, we might not ever know. That's the $1 million question that this new general manager is going to have to answer and deal with.
That is, yeah, it's a huge thing. I mean, it's a huge table to be sitting in front of, especially with all of these deals coming in on July 1st with the no trades, no movements, and all of that stuff. And now there's reports, rumblings out there that Austin Matthews may not be keen to sign an extension on July 1st. And I think that's something you need to know. But I mean, really, who knows what actually is being said?
Yeah, and the other thing is, obviously, he wants to know who the general manager is going to be. He'd like to know who the new head coach is going to be, assuming Sheldon's not coming back. And if you're a new GM, there's a good chance he's going to want to bring in his own guy. So these are things you want clarified. But they can get this deal done before the start. For me, it's the start of the regular season. And even before the start of training camp, to get this thing done. July 1st would be good, but if it doesn't happen, then I don't know.
Are you not worried about the no trades and no movement clause kicking in for Austin Matthews?
Yeah, at that point in time. No, you're right. We've got what, 5 weeks to go before this gets done. So they've got to get a GM hired. I think once that happens, then the next dominoes obviously could be Austin. It's got to be done by July 1, as is William Nylander. But if not, especially with William going into the draft, there could be a lot of talking between draft tables as to what's going to go on. And the Leafs have, what, a 28th in the first round and then a 5th and a 6th round. You could see a few more picks, prospects, and maybe active players, a great defenseman, a top pairing defenseman coming over to help Morgan and Jake McCabe and TJ Brody. There could be that. But if I just don't want to be going in with Austin Matthews unless they're forced to, not having a contract, because I'll tell you guys, I've been down in that barnyard when things are pressing, and it's an incredible sideshow at the Ford Performance Center or at the rink as well in a market like Toronto, as it would be in any other market with a player like this. You know, if Connor McDavid's going through this, it's the same thing in Edmonton, except it's Edmonton. Toronto's a lot bigger market, and they've got to get it done. And I think there's a lot of posturing going on. I don't see Austin going anywhere, and it's just going to be about term. I can see him signing a 5-year deal in the 13 to 14 range. He'll be the highest paid player in the National Hockey League, and he gets that deal done by the time he's 30, and he's got another major payday coming to him. I don't see the 8-year deal, but I see another 5-year deal. I think that's going to get done.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I said this last time on our show here. I think with superstar players, you're going to start seeing them kind of sign the smaller deals a la the NBA players to maximize their earning window and get more money, which will freak out fans, especially because you want your favorite player to stay. But I think, again, it's more posturing, more about business side of it as well, getting more money throughout your career, which is what Austin Matthews essentially will do with these smaller deals, is he'll get more dollars in his pocket.
I don't know. I'm a strong believer in, like, how can you win with someone earning that much? And I totally understand it as like the player standpoint, but I just think, like, you look at Crosby and Ovi, they're people that took a little bit less in their coming up years. But again, obviously it is a new superstar. I sometimes get frustrated looking at numbers like that.
Yeah, but can you win without a generational talent? If Austin stays in Toronto, he'll leave as the greatest Maple Leaf of all time. I think his numbers, granted, will not have, well, we don't know what he will have won in terms of Stanley Cups, but it's a different era now. And, you know, I talked about it on other podcasts. Ovi was 13 years before he won a cup. Steve Yzerman, 14. Both those guys were drummed by their fan bases to get, you know, time to move on. We can't win with these guys. But what are you going to get back if you trade them? I really
100%, think 100%.
Yeah, and you know, Sidney Crosby to your credit and to his, he was 4 years before they won. Connor
Oh,
McDavid just finished an 8th year without winning a cup. It's a damn hard trophy to win.
it is.
You see, yeah, go ahead.
I just look at a bunch of these teams, and they have a bunch of grit and guys that are like they are going all in, and I think that is something that the Leafs need to 100% buy into before they get their heads all messed up in everything else. I understand the pressure too is terrifying in Toronto, especially with fans that are like saying negative things, and then there's other people on the other side of the table. But yeah, no, I trust me, there's that thing signed back there for a reason. I really do hope that he stays. So
yeah, and you know what? You can go and play in a place like Nashville, with all due respect, even Buffalo. Montreal's a high-pressured market. So is Toronto, but it's high risk. It's high reward. The organization's fantastic. I don't know if you've ever been inside the Marlies facilities. They're better than most teams in the National Hockey League, especially the practice facilities down at the Ford Performance Center. I remember the day Hitchcock got fired. We were flying in from Dallas to St. Louis. It was an off day. And Hitch had just been fired. So we went and covered that, and covered at the Blues practice facility, which is part of an old mall in suburban St. Louis. It's a rink used by the public where you can rent skates, etc., to go in. And, you know, that team, a year or two later, ended up winning the entire thing, the Stanley Cup. But to get back to the Marlies facilities and their practice facilities and the meals and everything. And even, you know, with the Leafs, I remember Mike Pekka talking about it after he left Toronto, just how great an organization is. They cross T's, they dot I's. It's a fabulous place to organization to be with, play for, and it's a great city to play in. But there are expectations, and that's just it, guys. You can go and disappear in other markets, but there's nothing like this market, or Montreal's for that matter. Especially when you win. I remember talking to Paul Marner. He wasn't happy, you know, in Mitch's first year with, you know, Mitch's ice time and all this stuff. And I said, Paul, take a deep breath. If Mitch is around when this team wins a Stanley Cup, they're going to rename Young Street Marner Street. Like this is where you want to be. And I think he knows that. It's not always easy. But I might be biased, but it's a great place, and that logo and the history that goes with it. And I think Austin understands that. But it's going to come down to money and whatever term he's going to want. But I think there's a 13.5 and a 5-year deal that would fit with him, and the Leafs go from there and buy off another 5 years, and that maybe just say so long in 5 years from now if it doesn't work.
That may be the thing. I want to ask you this question. Obviously, you talk about the barnyard and being around there in your time being with the Maple Leafs, and, you know, being there every day. Going into an off season, this one here seems like it's one of those franchise-altering off seasons. Things have to go right. Things have to be done right, because if you don't sign Austin, you have to trade him, or you have to do these moves, or you have to do something, because obviously you don't want to go in with so many unknowns, with the Nylander not signed, with the Matthews not signed. Then they have all the power. Where they end up going, there may be change. But have you ever been a part or around this team during an offseason kind of as important as this one?
No, not even close. And I don't think I've been a part of a team with so much elite talent as this. The Pat Quinn teams in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of talent, but that talent was in the latter, you know, the twilight stages of their so-called careers. This group, I mean, William just turned 27. 27. May 1st, I think his birthday is. So he's the eldest of that group, and he's only 27.
That's crazy,
I mean, there's a lot of runway left with this generational talent, and they've got, well, 3 of them. John Tavares, he's a point-per-game guy. I see him eventually moving over to the wing. I see the Leafs having to get a center to replace him as his career moves on, you know, into his early 30s. But this is a very talented group of players. So I don't think there's been anything like that. If anything, I remember when the Leafs were looking to come out of, the lockout in 2005 and moving on, and Matt Sundin being pressured to leave the organization so the team could start its rebuild. And I remember walking into the lobby of the Brook Street Hotel in Canada, and Matt is on the phone with a serious look on his face. And turned out he was talking to Boreas Salming, and Borea told him, it's the Maple Leafs. You don't leave the team. If they tell you it's time to go on, then fine, but you don't voluntarily leave the Toronto Maple Leafs. And eventually, Matt Stiddy ended up out in Vancouver. But, Sundin, it meant a lot to him to wear the C on his jersey, and meant a lot to him to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and to be engaged in a conversation with someone like Boreas Salming, who told him, no, you stick around. You don't leave this team. Really meant a lot to him. So I think looking back, that kind of is something sort of similar, but nothing like we've got here now, because this generational talent is just so young and has so much more to give. And I'd love to see them give it in Toronto, as opposed to watching them in another jersey, whether it be
100%.
Nylander or Marner or whoever, guys.
I think a lot of, not even this generation, but the people that are watching hockey now are taking it all for granted. Like, they don't remember the teams that we used to have, and it sucks to say that, but I notice, even just being on TikTok and stuff, that there's a lot of toxicity in people wanting to jump ship right away. They're like, something needs to change right away when something's bad. And I kind of took a step back at the end of this season, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever really paid attention to it, but this season has been so much highs and lows. And it's all because of the fan base. And I think these guys understand that. And I don't think they want to leave without doing the job that is on the table for them. I truly think that these guys can get it done. It's just, they gotta learn, and it takes a long time to learn in this league sometimes.
It does, and at least finally they won a series, and I think it's the way they lost the second round in 5 games. But now that team that beat them is 2 wins away from going to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, tip of the hat to Florida. Tip of the hat to Paul Maurice. I mean, he broke our hearts in 2002 when Carolina beat the Maple Leafs in the conference final. It takes a while, but if you get, they're talking about maybe Marner would get you this and that. He's one of the top 5 right wingers on the entire planet. You're going to get rid of him. Plus, he's a great defensive player. He kills penalties.
He's up for the Selke.
He's up for the Selke. Why would you trade him as a guy you drafted and developed? William Nylander is a guy who's been in the organization for almost a decade. A couple of years with the Marlies, and then he's been 8 years with the Maple Leafs. He's coming off, he's only missed 1 game in the last 2 years. He's had 34 and 40 goals, and you're going to let him go? Maybe they.
I've always come with the argument. Go ahead,
maybe they have to provide themselves with some cap flexibility, and maybe a deal like that might bring in a 1B defenseman. Maybe a second or third line center, because they're going to have to replace Ryan O'Reilly. And I think eventually John Tavares, who's got 2 years left in his deal, is moving over to the wing. And so they've got some holes to plug, and it might mean parting with a talent like William, who's very mobile at this time, given he's 1 year left in his deal at $6.9 million. And I just hate to see him go. I hate to see him go.
I hate to see him go. And I always say this about trades. You look at trading a guy like that. Okay, I say, what are you getting back that really provides you with some oomph for what you're trading? But also, what do you have in your organization now that will replace some of what you're losing? And a William Nylander, the Leafs do not have anything to really replace that, unless you're putting all your eggs in the Matthew Knies and Nick Robertson basket. And we've done that a couple of times with Robertson, and he's been oft injured. Matthew Knies looks like he might be something, but guys, he hasn't played a whole lot yet. Let the kid get his feet wet before we anoint him the next guy on the top line. But I would agree with you, Paul. I don't want to see Nylander go. I don't want to see Marner go. I don't want to see Tavares leave, and I damn sure don't want to see Austin Matthews leave. I want to see these guys be able to get it done. Right. And it may mean having to put a pick again on Matt Murray and send him out the door like you did with Petr Mrazek, and make a deal there, attach a pick or a prospect, send Matt Murray somewhere to play, free up that money, and away you go. And you also don't know what the status of Jake Muzzin is going to be come the fall either. Will he be healthy enough to play or not?
I'm not a doctor. I doubt it. I think Jake is done. I think he's done.
But that just means they can't use that money until the first night of the season, right? You can't LTIR him until then.
Right. And I think there's no doubt that Matt Murray's done in Toronto, and Kyle rolled the dice. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Now you've got Ilya Samsonov, who is a restricted free agent, albeit he's got arbitration rights. Yeah. So you bring him back for just under $2 million, give him a chance to prove again that he's capable of having a similar type season, and if he does, then you give him a longer term deal. Joseph Wall at his price tag, and he's good enough, is going to come in as your second goaltender, and I think you go from there. I just don't know what departing with Murray is going to cost you. Because they don't have a lot of picks to give up. Maybe it's going to be a prospect. And, with all due respect to Nyes, I think he's going to be a good National Hockey Leaguer. Nick Robertson hasn't even played a season in the NHL yet.
No.
William Nylanders, he just completed his 8th season in the NHL.
Exactly.
You don't give that away. You might have to, but you don't. So,
I look at it like this too. There's lots that the Leafs will be able to do. I mean, they will have some flexibility. I don't think you bring back Ryan O'Reilly, but I do think you can bring back David Kampf, who was good on your penalty kill and a guy that's a good depth type forward guy. Yeah, and I mean, there will be other guys that hit the market that you may be able to snag up. One guy I'd like to see them run after is Bertuzzi, but I think he's going to get a pretty good payday.
Yeah, and Boston is kind of in a situation where they're going to have to move some bodies in an effort to keep him as well. And so, good for Bertuzzi. I'd love what he would bring to Toronto. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe there's some money in packages around that would see Bertuzzi come in and the Leafs able to go in a different direction. But it might mean having to get rid of one of these key players we've talked about, and that financial flexibility. To help balance out the rest of the team. The contract, I remember when it was signed, when Kyle, outbid everyone and brought JT in, I was extremely excited. But you knew down the line with those other guys and the contracts that they were going to sign that the organization was really going to be sort of handcuffed top heavy. So you have a window of opportunity, which has now sort of run its course.
Cool. Yeah.
And they've won one round, right? So
I also think though, you look at that deal when you signed JT, and in retrospect, it wasn't the highest bid either, but they were able to pitch him the right way. But what happened was they laid out their strategy as such that the cap would go up, X amount of dollars, and they would
COVID
have
hits.
And they didn't. No one factored in COVID, so and I know and everybody always says, well, other teams figured it out, but other teams didn't sign deals in that window thinking that they would have $8 or $9 or $10 million more cap space by the time JT got to year 3 or 4 of that deal, when that gives you the flexibility to do these things. But if and what's our candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. But JT is where he is now. But I look at the Maple Leafs and I say there's another guy that is kind of a fan favorite, kind of a lightning rod, and he reminds me a lot of one guy, Darcy Tucker. That's Michael Bunting. He's a guy who chirps a lot.
Sorry, I think he's gone, right? Do you guys agree with that?
I think he's priced himself out, and I also think that maybe even with management, he may have kind of run his course a little bit, just with the antics and stuff like that. I know they love him, and we all love him. But I think that he priced himself out because he proved he can play with top players, for one.
Yeah.
And for two, he proved he can be a Brad Marchand light where he's chirping. He doesn't drop the mitts or get very physical with guys, but he'll scrum it up with anybody. He's not afraid to be in the scrums, but he doesn't Donnybrook like some guys do. But that's a guy right there where I'm like, man, how do you replicate somebody like that who draws a lot of penalties for your team?
Well, when Zach Hyman left to Edmonton, I think we asked the same question, right? And I wish we still had Zach. I wish we still had Nazem Kadri. I'd love to keep Michael Bunting here. I really would like to keep Michael Bunting here. I think he's done well enough, and I don't care about the antics and all of that. That is what it is. That's who he is.
Part and parcel,
But the fact of the matter is, I just don't financially see how it happens. Nyes is coming in on the left side. He's got 2 more years before his next deal is up, and he's nine and change. So 975, 950, whatever it is.
Cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap, and so I think Bunting, as a result, is going to be expendable. It's too bad, but you say, can he be replaced? They found somebody to replace Zach Hyman.
I didn't think anybody would replace Zach Hyman, man. I was a big Zach Hyman fan. Hashtag Hyman Hustle was my thing all the time when he was here.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I still wish we had him, but not on the term, at his age.
And the injuries.
And the injuries, exactly.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to get your take on, obviously, you watch this young defenseman come into the league, and at the trade deadline, we all watched him come back to the team. I just wanted to get your take on having Shen around the locker room again.
Loved it. Yeah. He's one of my all-time favorite guys that I've covered in my entire time. Alan McCauley, Luke Shen. Those guys are 1A, 1B. Steve Thomas. There's a bunch of guys.
Yeah.
But Luke is such a good guy. He's just a tremendous, tremendous person. I remember years ago, my parents lived at Queens Quay, right at Yonge Street, and across from the Weston, and Luke and a bunch of guys lived in the building. But anyway, Luke, as an 18-year-old, was looking at buying a unit in the building. And anyway, lo and behold, I'm at practice the next day. It's a game day, and Luke comes over. Hey, Henny, I was at your mom and dad's house last night. And so the condo manager said, I know a couple have just renovated a unit similar to what you might buy, and let me bring you up. And Dale and Nora, he says, your dad had just come back from, my dad's he was a geologist, and high end in the corporate end of it, near the end of his career. And your dad had a bunch of pens in his pocket, and his glasses were hanging around his shoulders. And your mom was so nice. I said, hang on here. What was going on? He said, no, I was at your mom and dad's house last night. I got a tour of their place. But this was 18-year-old Luke, right?
Yeah.
Who made the team as a teenager, and then Morgan Riley would be the next teenager to make it as a blue liner. Both quality people, both quality hockey players. But Luke was just such a genuine guy, and the eldest with his brother Braden, his 2 sisters. Dad's a firefighter in Saskatoon. They're just of the earth, and I can't say enough about him and just what a quality guy he was, and is. I didn't know he would have the impact he had. I hope they're going to bring him back. I know Luke's team would like to see maybe 2 years. I don't know if the Leafs can give him 2. And I remember on my former podcast, Luke was my first guest a couple of weeks after winning the Stanley Cup, and he didn't have a contract. And he said, I'd love to come back to Toronto, but I don't think they want me back, meaning Kyle. And it's just where the Leafs were at that point in time, right? They maybe didn't think him mobile enough for the team they had, but then all of a sudden you realize, we could use a little more physicality back there than what we have had. And, eventually Kyle realizes, no, we got to get Luke Shen. And Luke was just absolutely fantastic. I think in an ideal world, they'll give him a raise and he stays for 1 year. But, the Vancouver Canucks are offering 2. I think Luke could be back out west, his wife, kids, their full-time home is in Kelowna, and that might be a better fit just on the home front for him. But I hope the Leafs do all they can to bring him back and that physicality that he still provides, because he looked like he had it, without a doubt, still had it. Yeah.
No, listen, watching him throughout the playoffs, the blocking the shots, just big time plays in big time minutes is what you need from some guys in the playoffs. And he elevated his game. I don't know why the Leafs wouldn't give him 2 years at 1.5. I don't know if that's the price tag he'd want, but I mean,
well, I think they'd take that.
2 years at 1.5. I mean, they've given worse contracts, to be honest with you, and I'd be very happy with that. And you also know some of these guys. You look at around the league, just to talk veterans for a moment. Corey Perry, other guys that you don't pay them for the regular season. You're paying them more for the postseason and what they're going to bring for you during that time of year where the game kind of the switch flips. It's just different. It's not the same as regular season. And
Not
we
even
saw
close.
that with Luke Chen. So, I mean, and I want to ask you that question because that's something a lot of people want to try to dispel. And I've talked to a couple of people like David Jackson, former NHL ref, and he said, there's no difference. And to me, I say there's a lot of difference. It's more physical. It's more impactful. The game is different. It's called different. It's played different. You've been around enough iterations of the Maple Leafs. Do you think the postseason is a different animal?
Oh, it's a sprint. You know what, guys? I'm just going to turn on a light right here. Things are getting dark.
That's okay.
I want to give you more than that.
Perfect.
Thank you. It's a hard sprint. It's a hard sprint. But I'm going to be honest. You think about the time that I covered the Leafs. I mean, I was there from 1995 on, mixed results. They got to the conference final in 99. And then Pat, with Pat Quinn, had another run at it in 2002. Had teams that Pat thought could have won the whole damn thing in 2003 and 2004 and didn't. Injuries and things just get in the way. And then this team was loaded, contract loaded with all this older talent, and they come out of the lockout in 05 and they're dead in the water. And they don't make the playoffs until another lockout, shortened season in 2013, right?
Yeah.
And even that team, that was what, a 48-game season. I don't know if they make the playoffs over 82. They might not. Then they go to Game 7, May 13th, 2013, with the Bruins, and we know what happened there. And then they're out until 2016. It's a long time. So I haven't been to a lot of playoffs, which is what I'm getting at. But I certainly know, given what I have seen and just how hard it is, and then covering, this group of guys up until I retired 3 years ago, and seeing what they were able to do against Boston, losing in Game 7s, going to Game 6 with the Washington Capitals, who were a year removed from winning the whole damn thing. There's a learning process here that's involved. You got to make sure you have the good pieces. You got to have really good goaltending. You don't have to have Hall of Fame goaltending, but you've got to have really good goaltending. And I think this club, I said it on a podcast that I participated in this year with David Alter. I think
Love David.
I think this Leaf team wins the cup next year. I said this 6 weeks ago. Not like next year will be their time. A lot has to happen to make it happen. But I know if we look back mid-season at the standings, none of us had the Florida Panthers where they are right now, or even if Paul Maurice is still the head coach of this club, because they were just going south quick.
There was conspiracy theories that Montreal was going to get 2 picks in the top 10 at one point.
Yeah.
It's true. It's crazy.
You can always look back and at these things, and I mean, it seems like teams that I wouldn't say tear it down, because you look at Nashville or Chicago when they didn't have playoff results they wanted, and they started trading guys and blow it up, and it didn't go well for them. It just didn't. I think the Leafs, you're right, Paul, need to stay with this group, but maybe it needs to be fresh voices above them with new ideas of how to make this core move along to where they can be and maybe get the best out of them. A guy that I'd like to see behind the bench if Keefe isn't back, I like Sheldon Keefe. I actually do.
So
I think he's a good coach. But if he's not the one that's coming back and they're going with somebody else, I wouldn't mind seeing a Gerard Gallant behind the bench.
Okay, what about you, Dylan? Who'd you like to see?
Before Spezza left, I was leaning towards Spezza, but
I don't know. I don't know about him as a head coach just yet. Maybe too soon.
I want somebody that yells at them at the right time, but also is like, listen, boys, like, you guys know how to play this game, and gives them the ropes. I don't know who that is, in technicality. Like, I don't watch, obviously, locker room stuff, but I just want somebody that isn't.
I say Gallant can be that guy. Gallant knows how to yell at you, but also knows how to be your friend at the same time.
Sheldon Keefe can be that as well. Sheldon Keefe, believe me, guys, he can yell, and he's a player's coach. We know if Sheldon was the head coach, there's no way Jason Spetz is sitting out his first game as a Leaf with 20 family members in the stands. That would never have happened. I can go on and on. Sheldon Keefe, he's a good coach. He's a good coach. Yeah. And if he's to go out, you've just got to look back. You know, I know his playoff record hasn't been terrific, but his regular season and getting them there has been. They've averaged, 106 points the last 4 years. Now, that said, there's a new GM coming in. It might be out of Sheldon's hands. Sheldon could get extended, or he's got one more year left in his deal. But two names that come to mind for me, Claude Julien's still out there, and Dave Tippett's another head coach who's still out there as well. These are guys, different voices, but Claude Julien would be somebody I'd like to see come into Toronto, a veteran guy who can handle all of this. Tippett, I'd say in the same mode as well, having coached in Canada.
I do remember seeing a name, Alain Vigneault. I think would be a good one.
Yeah, I like Alain. He hasn't been, he's been off the beaten path for a little bit.
Yeah,
but that's a possibility. But I think it's important. The GM's gonna have to put some pieces in place. But I do think if there's a new GM coming in, there's going to be a new head coach, and Sheldon will be coaching somewhere else. Without a doubt, he'll be coaching somewhere else. Yep. And if they say goodbye to him, it will be that Sheldon's still got another year in his deal to get things figured out employment-wise somewhere else. And without a doubt, he'll get hired somewhere else.
Well, it's definitely going to be an interesting summer. And, Paul, I hope to get you back on and bend your ear once things start to fall into place for the Maple Leafs this offseason.
Well, thanks, guys. A pleasure talking with you. And the situation is as clear as mud 42 minutes into our conversation.
Hey, listen, you know what? You provided some good stories and good insight anyways of things we may not have been thinking about. So, Paul, it's always great to have you on. I always loved listening to you when you were with the Leafs. I loved how you always started it off with a softball question at the pressers. Really made everybody feel comfortable. That was always fun.
You know what? I'm going to beg difference. There's no such thing as a softball question when you're covering a team for 25 years and you last 25 years. There's no such thing as a softball. But if you want to get a press conference going in a certain direction, you lead it in a certain direction.
That's it.
So with all due respect, no softball questions. Because if the tough questions had to be asked, they would be asked. But no such thing as a softball question. So I'll take that the way it is, but I'll beg to differ with you on that. You don't work for 41 consecutive years by asking softball questions.
I didn't mean
tell you that
way.
Straight out. Well, anyway, it's okay. It's okay. But just put yourself in somebody else's shoes and see what it's like. I'll go back over all my press conferences. I don't recall a softball question, even after the toughest of losses.
I meant more your tone and who you were, not softball, not the question per se.
A question delivered with respect and a question delivered in a way that will get that person to get things started. But not,
that's more what I meant than the question itself.
I like peanut butter and jam. How about you? No. All right.
It was never that regard. No.
Okay.
My apologies.
All right.
All right, Paul. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have you back on hopefully throughout the summertime, sir. But enjoy your summer up until then.
Okay. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Paul Hendrick. That was awesome. Dylan, he's always great to have on. I messed up on the last one. I'm tired. I worded it wrong, hence the reason why I drink Red Bull. I did not mean to say softball question. Meant to always say he always started them off the right way. But, it came out the wrong way. So my apologies to Paul. Didn't mean to upset him at the end there. But,
brings a lot of nostalgia here in his voice.
Man, who doesn't love Henny tweets, man?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. But ladies and gentlemen, that was a great show. Obviously, Paul said we're still clear as mud of what's going on. But this is Offside Hockey Talk, where the Maple Leafs and hockey come to talk.